Hey, old man, what are you looking at? Get out of here!
He only bumped the handlebar, a soft graze, on his way past the row of parked motorcycles. But the biker didn't see an accident. He saw an old man in a faded airborne jacket. A relic, maybe. An easy target. The old man barely looked up. The biker turned around. "What's your problem, old man? That bike costs more than your social security check." No response. So he shoved him. The old man stumbled back, nearly dropping the brown paper bag with his bread and medicine. "Move faster next time, Grandpa." Someone laughed inside the bar. Another voice whispered, "Not cool, man." But nobody stood up. The biker went back to his drink, proud. He didn't know. Didn't know that 30 minutes from now, a Black Hawk would land right outside that bar. And every single man there would rise to their feet. Not for him. For the man he just shoved. The old man took a seat at the far end of the bar. Quiet. Weathered. Forgotten. His name was Walter Briggs. 84 years old. Two-time Silver Star recipient. And the last surviving member of a classified Black Hawk recon unit. He didn't wear medals on his chest. He wore memory in his eyes. While others drank for fun, Walter drank for silence. 30 minutes later, the rumble shook the windows. People rushed outside. A Black Hawk helicopter, marked only by a call sign and the number 27, hovered above Main Street, then descended. Soldiers disembarked. Men in full uniform. One by one, they marched into the bar. The same biker, now sobered up, shouted over the noise, "What the hell is this?" Then he saw it. Not guns. Not anger. Salutes. Each soldier stopped at Walter Briggs's table. And saluted. No words. Just honor. The leader removed his helmet. "Sir." Command heard what happened. "We don't leave our own behind." The bar went silent. Walter stood slowly. Shaky hands. Eyes wet. He saluted back. Every man in the bar stood. Even the biker. Nobody told him to. He just stood. Because sometimes, silence is the only apology that matters. As the helicopter lifted, Walter walked between the soldiers. Not as a frail old man. But as what he'd always been. A warrior. And for once, the world remembered. The bar's warmth didn't reach the booth in the far corner where Walter Briggs sat, hunched over a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The overhead fan turned lazily. The jukebox played a song nobody cared to name. Laughter buzzed from the pool table. The biker, still half-drunk on pride, spun his empty glass and called for another round. He didn't even glance toward the old man he'd shoved minutes ago. Walter didn't say a word. He never did, not unless he had to. The bartender, a kid barely into his 20s with tattoos he'd never earn in battle, glanced toward Walter with uneasy eyes. He'd seen him before. Everyone in the town had. The guy who bought a loaf of bread and a prescription bottle every Sunday. Who sat on that same barstool without ordering anything stronger than black coffee. They all called him the Ghost. Not because he scared anyone. Because he reminded them of something they didn't want to remember. Service. Sacrifice. Silence. Walter shifted in his seat. The old jacket creaked at the seams. His fingers, trembling from more than age, curled slowly around the paper bag. It held bread. Heart medication. And an envelope from the VA, still unopened. A man across the room leaned over to his buddy. "That guy's been wearing that jacket since I was a kid. Think he just likes attention." The buddy chuckled. "I think he's lost. Thinks we still salute guys like him." But they didn't say it loud enough for Walter to hear. And even if they had, he wouldn't have flinched. He'd heard worse. Seen worse. Survived worse. In his head, the jukebox wasn't playing a country song. It was humming the sound of rotor blades. The endless chop 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 of Black Hawks descending into jungle clearings, kicking up dust and memories and the scent of blood-soaked earth. Walter closed his eyes. He saw the jungle again. The night flares. The silent signals. The 12 men he'd led. 11 didn't come home. And now, he carried all of them inside him, every breath like a promise not to forget. Outside, the wind howled down Main Street, sweeping up forgotten leaves and tossing them against the front windows of the bar. A flag flapped across the street above a closed hardware store, its stars faded, its fabric torn. Back inside, the biker stood to stretch. "Gonna light one up," he said to no one in particular, pushing through the bar door and spitting on the sidewalk. Walter watched him leave. Watched him swagger like a man who had never once been humbled. The paper bag in Walter's hand crinkled softly as he adjusted it in his lap. He'd been thinking of leaving. Walking home, as he always did, 2 blocks down and 1 over, to a little gray house with no pictures on the walls and a folded flag on the mantel. But something kept him there. A tug. A shadow. A whisper from long ago. The bartender approached, finally brave enough to say something. "You okay, sir?" Walter nodded once. The bartender hesitated. "That guy shouldn't have done that. I mean, it wasn't right." Still, Walter said nothing. The bartender sighed and walked away. Not because he didn't care. Because he didn't know what else to do. That was the thing about Walter Briggs. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't wear his pain like a badge. He just existed. Quietly. Honorably. In a world that had forgotten the meaning of both. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Outside, the biker leaned against his Harley, blowing smoke into the night and laughing at something on his phone. And then, it began. A low, strange hum, like thunder trapped in a tunnel. People inside the bar paused. One guy turned down the jukebox. A woman looked up from her phone. The bartender stepped outside. And saw it. A dark shadow moving fast across the sky. Then a second. And a third. By the time the 4th chopper passed overhead, the sound was unmistakable. Black Hawks. Coming low. Coming fast. And coming straight for Main Street. Inside, glasses rattled. A pool cue fell to the floor. Someone yelled, "What the hell is going on?" The biker's smirk disappeared. He stepped away from his bike and looked up, squinting. Then came the roar. A single Black Hawk hovered above the bar for 3 long seconds before descending with mechanical precision. Dust and gravel swirled. Car alarms went off. Phones flew out of pockets, capturing the scene in shaky, stunned silence. The town had never seen anything like it. The helicopter touched down. The blades didn't stop. The side door opened. Boots hit the pavement. Men in black uniforms stepped out, no visible ranks, no names, just a patch, 27th Shadow Recon. The kind of patch that doesn't exist in any official record. The kind of patch only men like Walter would recognize. Back in the bar, everyone stood. Except Walter. He just looked up. Eyes clear now. Hands still trembling. The bartender whispered, "Are they here for you?" Walter said, "Not for me. For what I stood for." The biker stepped back as the soldiers marched toward the entrance. No guns drawn. No shouts. Just boots. Purposeful. Heavy. Final. The leader of the unit entered first. He paused at the door, removed his helmet, and scanned the room. And when he saw Walter Briggs, he saluted. No hesitation. No delay. One by one, every soldier followed his lead. A dozen men in black, heads high, backs straight, saluting a man the world had passed by. Walter rose. Slowly. Not because he was weak. But because rising for a salute should never be rushed. He returned the gesture. And the room, now breathless, watched history bow its head to one man. One man who had once fought in shadows. And now stood in light. The biker didn't say a word. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Because when you see real honor, you don't argue with it. You just learn. Walter didn't speak as the soldiers escorted him outside. But as he passed the biker, he paused. Looked at him. And simply said, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you carry." Then he stepped out. Into the wind. Into the sound of the Black Hawk blades. Into a world that, at least for now, remembered. And the town? It stood still. Because for the first time in decades, it saw a hero. Not in a movie. Not in a book. But right there. In the corner booth. Wearing an old jacket. Carrying a paper bag. The bar didn't go back to normal that night. Even after the Black Hawk thundered off into the night sky, carrying Walter Briggs away, leaving behind a street still trembling from rotor wash, something had changed. Not just in the air, but in the hearts of every man, every woman, every soul who had witnessed what respect looked like when it landed with steel blades and a soldier's salute. Inside the bar, the lights felt dimmer. The laughter that had once echoed off the old wooden walls now hung heavy and unsure. At the counter, the bartender, Rick, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, quietly polished the same glass for 10 minutes straight. He didn't even realize he was doing it. He looked up when the biker returned. Jason. That was his name. The man who had shoved Walter. The man who laughed. But now, he wasn't swaggering. He wasn't loud. He didn't speak. He just walked to the corner booth where Walter had been sitting earlier. The seat was still warm, like it was guarding the memory of a man too many had ignored. Jason didn't sit. He stood there, gripping the backrest of the booth like it might somehow steady him. No one spoke to him. No one mocked him either. They just watched. Sometimes shame doesn't need a spotlight. It burns brightest when it flickers quietly in the corner of a crowded room. He pulled a bar stool closer. Sat down with his elbows on his knees. Head low. Eyes unfocused. Rick walked over eventually, placing a glass of water on the table next to him. No beer. No judgment. Just water. Jason nodded, barely lifting his eyes. You didn't know, Rick said, voice low. Jason exhaled slowly, but didn't answer. He didn't need to. No one did, Rick added. Not really. Jason finally looked up, face pale beneath the tattoos. I thought he was just another. He stopped himself. I didn't see him. Rick studied him. You mean, you saw him. But you didn't look. Jason looked away again. And that was when another voice spoke, one none of them had expected. It came from the back corner, near the jukebox. An old man with cloudy eyes and skin as worn as the whiskey bottle he held. His name was Charlie. Vietnam vet. Nobody asked questions about Charlie. He spoke little. Drank less. But when he did talk, the room always listened. He walked into that bar every Friday, Charlie said. For 20 years. The whole place went quiet. Jason turned to him slowly. Charlie kept going, voice steady but filled with gravel. Sat in the same seat. Ordered the same thing. Never caused trouble. Never spoke unless spoken to. Rick nodded solemnly. Always paid in exact change. Charlie took a swig. You know how hard that is these days. Exact change. A few people chuckled quietly. It was a gentle sound. Not disrespectful. Charlie leaned forward. Walter wasn't just a soldier. He was a ghost. A living one. That patch on his jacket. You know what it means? Jason didn't answer. Black Hawk Recon. No official record. But I know what they did. Behind lines. No backup. Just maps and guts. Jason stared at the floor. He once carried his entire squad out of a burning village. One by one. Back broken. Crawled through a minefield. They found him 3 days later. Still alive. Holding the last man in his arms. That's the man you pushed. Jason's hands tightened into fists. I didn't know, he whispered. Charlie stood up, slowly, with a limp, and approached Jason. He placed a hand on his shoulder. Not hard. Not soft. Just, real. You know now, Charlie said. That's what matters. Jason's eyes were glossy. But he held back the tears. Barely. He stood up, leaving the water untouched. I have to make it right, he muttered. Rick raised an eyebrow. How? Jason didn't know. But the next day, he came back. Not in leather and boots. In jeans, a button-up shirt, and a clean shave. He walked to the corner of town where the Veterans Memorial stood, mostly ignored, except on national holidays. A brass plaque. A stone bench. A few flags that had long since faded in the sun. Jason knelt before it, pressing both hands to the cool stone. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. He just stayed. 4 hours. The townspeople noticed. Some took photos. Others just whispered. By evening, Jason was still there. Sunburned. Sweating. But unmoved. When Rick closed the bar that night, he drove by. Rolled down his window. You gonna sleep there, son? Jason looked up, face red and puffy. Maybe, he said. Until I stop seeing his eyes every time I blink. Rick nodded slowly. That'll take time. Jason stood up, brushing dust from his jeans. I found out where he lives, he said. Walter. Out in the hills. Near the lake. Rick raised an eyebrow. You going to him? Jason nodded. He doesn't know me. Doesn't need to. But I'm gonna fix his fence. I saw it's falling. And there's a stump in his driveway. Gonna pull it. Rick smiled for the first time in 2 days. That's a start, he said. Jason left the next morning before sunrise. By noon, he was out at Walter's property. The place was humble. A small cabin. Wood-paneled. No satellite dish. No internet. Just trees. Birds. And a flag flying proud. Jason didn't knock. He just started working. Pulled the weeds. Repaired the fence. Hauled logs. Repainted the mailbox. Hours passed. Then, as the sun dipped behind the pines, the front door opened. Walter stood there. No soldiers this time. Just the man. The man Jason had shoved. Walter looked at him for a long while. Jason froze. He didn't know what to say. But Walter spoke first. You missed a nail on that third plank. Jason swallowed. I'll fix it. Walter nodded. And then, he smiled. Just a little. But enough. He turned and walked back inside. And Jason? He picked up the hammer. And fixed the nail. The nail had been fixed. But Jason didn't stop there. For the next 3 weeks, the rumble of a Harley was replaced by the whir of a chainsaw, the creak of wooden planks, and the scraping of rusted tools being reborn under calloused hands. Every morning, he drove to Walter's cabin. Never invited. Never turned away. He rebuilt the porch railing. Repaired the broken gutter. Cleared the path through the woods that had overgrown like nature itself had forgotten the man who lived there. And still, Walter said almost nothing. Just that nod. That subtle, soldier's nod. But that alone spoke louder than words. Jason had once been feared in town for his fists, his temper, the way he walked like the world owed him something. But out here, in the quiet of a forgotten patriot's land, he was relearning what it meant to serve without being asked, to give without expecting a single thing in return. One afternoon, as Jason was trimming low-hanging branches, he heard the screen door creak open. Walter stepped out. He was holding something. A folded flag. Old. Faded. But ironed and crisp. He extended it without a word. Jason stepped down from the ladder, confused. "I don't understand," he said. Walter's voice was steady. "My boy." Jason's face froze. Walter's eyes didn't. "He was your age when he died." Afghanistan. 2006. Jason lowered his head. "I used to fold this flag every morning," Walter continued. "Iron it. Shake it out. It was my ritual. Part grief. Part pride. Part, something to keep the hands busy." He looked at Jason. "But lately, I haven't had to. Because you've been doing something for me I didn't even know I needed." Jason blinked hard. Walter stepped forward, placed the flag into his arms. "You can return it when you think you're done," he said. "Not before." Jason didn't move for a long time after Walter went back inside. He stood there, cradling that folded flag like it was the most fragile thing in the world. Because to him, in that moment, it was. Back in town, the story had spread. Not from Jason's mouth. But through whispers. Through curious eyes that noticed the shift in the man once defined by his roar. Now, he listened more than he spoke. He didn't drink much anymore. Didn't ride in packs. And every Sunday morning, people started seeing something no one expected. Jason, standing alone at the war memorial. Sometimes with a broom. Sometimes with flowers. Once, he was seen helping a frail Korean War veteran up the steps just so he could touch the plaque of a name he once called a friend. Some said he was trying to make amends. Others believed he was honoring something far deeper. Still, there were doubters. People don't forget cruelty easily. And transformation is a quiet thing, it doesn't come with announcements or applause. One night, as Jason was locking up the local repair garage where he'd picked up honest work, he found a note under his windshield. Folded. Written in neat, careful script. People change when they're seen. You helped a hero feel seen. Now we see you too. The town. Jason stood there under the street lamp, eyes welling again. Because that was the thing no one talked about when it came to redemption, it doesn't roar. It whispers. It was on a snowy morning, one of those rare, quiet days when the world seems hushed and holy, that Jason received a call. Walter had collapsed. Neighbors saw it from across the road. Paramedics were already on the scene. Jason dropped everything and rode. Not on his Harley. Not in a rush. He drove Walter's old pickup, the one he'd fixed up weeks ago, through winding frost-covered roads and white-dusted trees. When he arrived, Walter was being wheeled out of the cabin. Still conscious. Still proud. But pale. Jason knelt beside the stretcher. "Stubborn old man," he said, voice cracking. Walter smirked. "You're one to talk." Jason took his hand. Strong. Cold. Steady. Walter looked him in the eye. "If this is it, son," he said softly, "don't let them forget." Jason's jaw clenched. Forget what? He whispered. That I was more than a uniform. That soldiers, we feel things too. We bleed. We love. We carry things long after the battle's over. Jason nodded, tears now falling freely. They won't forget, he promised. Not on my watch. Walter's eyes fluttered shut. He didn't die that day. But something passed between them in that moment. A torch. An unspoken vow. The town rallied around Walter in the days that followed. Jason organized a rotation. Volunteers brought meals. Kids from the local high school painted his cabin. A woman who once worked in Washington sent a framed certificate of honor, recognizing Walter for a mission that never even made the papers. And every evening, Jason returned that flag to its place. Folded. Pressed. Sacred. He didn't speak of his past anymore. But one day, he did pull out an old photo from his wallet, a grainy shot of him in a juvenile courtroom, chained and angry. I was lost, he told Rick, who'd come to drop off soup. Rick stared at the photo. You were a kid. Jason looked away. Still hurt people. Rick placed a hand on his shoulder. And now you're helping heal one. Jason didn't answer. But he smiled. Weeks later, Walter returned home. Weaker. But alive. Jason met him at the door with a cane he'd carved by hand. Stained oak. Smooth handle. On the base, etched initials, WB. Walter took it. Didn't say anything. Just touched Jason's shoulder. That night, the two of them sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, hot tea steaming in their hands. They didn't talk about war. Or regret. Or the past. They watched the stars. Silent. Present. Alive. It was a Sunday morning when the silence broke. The kind of silence that feels sacred, when snow hangs midair like a held breath, and the sky wears a pale veil of gray. Winter had returned to the small town, blanketing the cabin, the war memorial, and the people in thick scarves and thin hope. Walter hadn't come out onto his porch in 3 days. Jason knew something was wrong. He climbed the snowy steps of the cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with just a drop of milk, the way Walter liked it. He knocked. No answer. He turned the knob gently. The door creaked open. There, in his chair by the window, sat Walter, peaceful, still, hands folded over that same folded American flag he had once handed to Jason. His cane rested beside him. His hat, creased and old, sat atop his chest like a final salute. Jason stood frozen. The coffee slipped from his hand and spilled silently onto the wooden floor. No sound. Just the ticking of the old clock. And the hum of a man's soul leaving quietly, like it had done everything it needed to. The town was silent for a different reason now. Flags flew at half-mast. Even the wind seemed to carry reverence. Jason arranged the funeral himself. He didn't need to ask. Everyone knew that this wasn't just a military funeral, it was a farewell to something sacred. And on the day of the ceremony, the bar where it all began closed its doors. Every biker came. Every bartender. Every single person who had once crossed the street to avoid Walter's slow shuffle now stood with their heads bowed as his casket, draped in the flag he had folded countless times, passed by. The local school band played taps. Veterans from neighboring counties arrived, medals gleaming on their coats. Some were wheelchair-bound. Others walked with a limp that told of stories they didn't need to explain. Jason stood at the front of it all. No leather. No chains. Just a black suit. A folded flag in his arms. His face solemn, his knuckles white. And then, the sound came. A low thrum. At first, a whisper in the distance. Then louder. Closer. People looked up. Eyes widened. A Black Hawk helicopter emerged from the gray sky like a memory taking shape. It hovered over the clearing beside the cemetery. Slow. Deliberate. Powerful. People stepped back as it descended gently, snow swirling in a halo around its blades. The doors opened. And from it stepped 6 soldiers. Full dress uniform. Medals shining like stardust against deep blue wool. The captain approached Jason. His voice was calm but carried the weight of generations. "You must be Jason Grant." Jason nodded. "Yes, sir." The soldier extended his hand. "Walter Bennett served with my grandfather. Saved his life in Vietnam. When I heard what you did, the way you honored him, I made some calls." Jason's voice trembled. "He saved me, sir. I just gave him back what the world forgot." The captain nodded. "That's why we're here." They carried Walter's casket with reverence. Not like it held a body, but like it held history. A bugle pierced the air. Sharp. Haunting. Then came the rifle volley. 3 sharp blasts that cracked through the silence like thunder on sacred ground. The entire town stood in stillness. Some with hands over hearts. Some with tears down their cheeks. And then, something happened no one would forget. Jason stepped forward, unfolded the flag one last time, and raised it high. Not to wave, but to hand back. To Walter's memory. To every man who never made it home. And as he stood there, the captain turned to him and said, "Would you like to say something?" Jason stepped up to the microphone. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, slowly, he began. "I met Walter Bennett the day I became my worst self. I shoved him. Laughed at him. Treated him like a relic. And he could have hated me. He could have ignored me. But he didn't. He saw something in me I couldn't even see in myself. And instead of punishing me, he gave me a second chance. I once thought respect had to be earned by fear. But Walter taught me it's earned by grace. He didn't need a statue or a parade. He just needed someone to remember. And I promise you, I'll remember, Walter. Every day. And I'll teach others to remember too." Jason paused, then looked up at the crowd. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a compass. And I was lucky enough to follow him home. The ceremony ended, but the story didn't. Over the following weeks, Jason transformed Walter's cabin into something new. A veteran's rest house. Not flashy. Not commercial. Just a quiet space in the woods for veterans passing through, for widows to find silence, for stories to be shared over cracked mugs of coffee. He named it Bennett's Porch. On the sign, carved by hand, were 3 words. Honor. Heal. Remember. The townsfolk donated tools, food, firewood. The local school began organizing visits. Students came to hear stories from the visiting vets, to listen instead of scroll, to ask what real courage sounds like. Jason never stopped writing. But now, his Harley was quieter. His presence softer. Wherever he went, people nodded in recognition, not of the man he was, but of the man he had become. One evening, years later, a boy around 10 approached Jason outside the memorial. He held out a drawing, crude, colorful. It was a picture of a man standing beside a flag and a helicopter. The boy looked up shyly. "Is that you?" Jason smiled. "No," he said. "That's a man named Walter. A real hero." The boy asked, "What did he do?" Jason looked out at the sunset, his voice low. "He taught a broken man how to stand again. And made sure the world remembered what respect really sounds like." If this story touched your heart, imagine what comes next. Hit subscribe and stay with us, for the ones who still believe in love, in hope, and in second chances.